My name is Everett Doolittle. I'm a retired special agent with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. Retired in 2001, finished my doctorate. Yes, I am Dr. Doolittle, and then became a professor with Metropolitan State University and shortly retired. The purpose of this video is really trying to help you with something that's very important on the lessons learned to share with you. A little more background: I was a police officer, I was a deputy sheriff, chief deputy, spent 32 years in law enforcement. I'm a graduate of the 125th FBI National Academy. So I spent most of my life in law enforcement, and for most of it working homicides. I was a field agent with the Bureau, had 7 counties, and then in 1991, I became part of a new unit that was formed called the Cold Case Homicide Unit with the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. It's a state agency is what it is, and it's part of the Department of Public Safety. Now, during this time, we worked old homicides, and the reason it was created because the superintendents made it very clear we don't want time to be the killer that keeps a case from being solved. So I want to walk you through some of the lessons and things I've learned, and hopefully this will help you as an investigator, will help you as a person who's lost somebody you care about. It will help you just as an interested person. It helps you understand that, in fact, time isn't your enemy. The article I'm actually going to refer to is an article that I actually put in the FBI National Academy. It was in March of 2012, called A Disease of Certainty. And I would hope you will get the article and take a look at it. I want to talk about some of the highlights and some of the lessons learned. The disease of certainty, really what it talks about, and it's a fatal disease once you catch it. Once we know the truth to be my truth and only my truth. Now, I don't want you to be confused. The cases I'm going to talk about, these are experienced, intelligent people working the case. And if it followed the normal theme of an investigation, they would have probably been successful. But it didn't follow the normal theme. And it's very contagious. What I mean is, once you believe you know what the truth is, the harder it is to see where the truth disagrees with you. And how easy it is to filter out information and get the information to help support your truth. So we want to look at this because it can affect the case unbelievably. So let's look at some of the key areas. Some refer to tunnel vision, and it really is. And it's more than tunnel vision. It's you truly know what the answer is. You work the case, and if you've been in a complex case, you know what I'm talking about. You go to many different avenues and many different possibilities, and all of a sudden you have one that truly looks like the only answer. And in fact, what happens, there's a book out, and it was called Reflection of the Scientific Revolution by Kuntz. And it talked about even in science, once somebody gets so ingrained with the truth is, only those on the outside, or we'll call the pioneers, can see the truth. Now, it actually affects you in many ways. It can keep you from even seeing other things, but also those that come in and say, I'm not sure, will be treated, and I've seen it so many times, with such hostility, in fact, they won't be back because it's so obvious. I remember in a case where the answer was they thought actually a priest did it. And they had an interview they did with him. They said, read the interview, it's so obvious he did it. I read the interview. There was no indication why they would think he did it from this interview, but yet they were so clear it told them the answer. So as we're going to look at these, I hope these lessons can help you in your career too, or as a concerned citizen. The cold case homicide unit we're going to talk about. Have an open mind. Be able to see things beyond it. Now the unit was formed, and it was formed in, again, 1991, I believe it was, and it had, at its highlight, I was the senior special agent in charge. I had 2 agents assigned to the unit. I had my own forensic scientist, and I had my own analyst. And the analyst is a critical aspect as we're going to look at why cases can be solved and why time isn't necessarily your enemy, and it can actually be your friend as you try to work an old case. Now, when I say old case, I'm talking 10, 15, 20 years old. Now, so let's take a look at it. It's a team approach. You don't walk this along. Now, I want to talk about each part of this. The agency is a partner in a partnership. This is a challenge because sometimes you have people who work this case for so long, they're so offended that you will actually look at their case. And if you disagree with them, I've had evidence kept from me, I've had reports kept from me. I had one case that I had to go to the sheriff and say, you'll have to remove the investigators from the case and just give me 2 people to work with me, 2 other, deputies. And we solved the case. And it was a fascinating case. We ran 87 people's DNA till we found the right person, who was only a person that lived a quarter mile away, that was a good citizen in the community, totally invisible because he didn't, quote, look like the person who would have committed the crime. Now, the person they thought did it was, in fact, very logically, was the old boyfriend. He lied to the police, and believe me, people lie to you. Don't take it personal. They do lie to you. And then he got an attorney. Oh my goodness, he got an attorney. He's got to be guilty. I went and talked to him and asked him if he would speak to me, and he did. And he said as the thing went along, don't you know what happened to me? And I want to share it with you because it's one of the lessons. They brought him in. They interrogated him. They lied to him. I got no problem with that. And he didn't have a problem with it. And he said, okay, because he said, I wanted to find out who killed Linda just as much as they did because I loved Linda. Then he said, after that, they went to his friends and everybody he knew and told all of them that he had killed Linda. It made him very angry, but he said, I understand what they're trying to do. They're just trying to find out and clear me. Then they went to his place of employment and told his boss and the people there how he killed Linda, trying to see if somebody knew something, and he lost the job. Then he got an attorney. Then it was, so again, it's a hard thing. We want you to be proactive. We want you to be creative, but at the same time, nothing's free. You can truly do unbelievable damage to people's lives. Nothing's free. Next thing I want to talk about the medical examiner. They're not equal. I've had cases where they said the last meal was celery and noodles. And I took her to the lab after we hunted and hunted trying to find where she was. And under the microscope, it was pickles and a French fry. So be careful. I've had a medical, say that actually the weapon that was used was a butt of a shotgun, and it turned out that it was a club. And it totally changed the investigation. I had a significant case, it's one we're going to talk about, where they said the victim was killed by a small hatchet in the head. And now there was no hatchet at the scene. It had to be brought to the scene. It changed the whole flavor of the investigation. When I picked the case up, I brought the piece of skull still in evidence. I brought it to the lab. The lab examined it, and it was flat on one side, curved, and in the middle of this was bridging small fibers. This was a crowbar or hatchet. Made all the difference. But that initial information by a medical examiner totally changed the flavor where the investigation was going. Forensic science has changed. Unbelievable. You want to take advantage. And in fact, the best answer I have a lot of times is if you can get some forensic scientists just to re-look at cases and the evidence, what we can do today, it's unbelievable. But in most of the cases I worked, other than one, the answer was in the file. It's there, but nobody can see it because it's in pieces, and nobody can see it because it doesn't fit what you believe the truth to be. County attorneys are part of your partnership. You need their support, and you need support of your agency. The media is not your enemy. When you work a cold case, why would anybody call a lead? They don't really exist. You need to work with the media, bring them in a partnership, and the family. Now here's a danger. You don't want to re-victimize the family. This is a long time ago. Believe me, they've never got over this. I've been to many families in their homes, and they got a shrine. They got things from the family. They got things from this child. And most of them are all young girls, and they're mostly, I'm going to say they're women, they're young, and they still live, and it's affect them forever. They don't just get over it. But be careful you don't make promises that you can't do. Bring the family in. And again, you don't know if the family's involved. So you got to balance that. But remember, your really goal is trying to help this family resolve this. It never closes it, but it helps bring an answer to it. And you can do it. Every case is worth the time to take on. So let's look at lessons learned. You need the support from the top. This is not an easy thing. In fact, the danger is many of you, and I'm going to say generically, if you worked a cold case, you pull it off a shelf, you play with it, you look at it, you touch it, you try a couple of leads, and maybe you're lucky. I know in Wisconsin they started a cold case unit, put it in the media, and a guy called from prison and said, I killed this person. I've never been there. But it's long term, and you can't dabble in it, and you can't play with it. You gotta be able to work the cases. I mean, it's one thing. In fact, the danger is I've seen where they take it, they dabble in it, they throw it in their drawer, it sits in the drawer, the chain of evidence is totally going to be destroyed. You know, evidence is going to be lost. I've had where evidence is totally lost, nobody knows what happened to it, because the guy that played with it retired and nobody can seem to locate. So be careful. Chain of evidence still counts. You have to think of a long-term focus. They're not going to solve this overnight, and if the top management, if people don't support a long-term focus, you're not going to be able to be successful. And law enforcement typically don't look at a long-term focus. And again, we talked about evidence. What is back years ago, a cigarette butt means very little. Today, it could mean everything. A beer can, there's so many things we can do, and evidence is changing unbelievable. I'm saying my experience, very few cases, evidence was the key, but it doesn't mean that evidence isn't the key, and what we can do today is so unbelievable. It's worth, if nothing else you can do, to bring the case to life again and reevaluate every bit of evidence. Case review, bringing everybody together who worked this case to talk to them, to bring them in. In this one case, I'm going to name the case, is Marlis Wallenhouse murder. Marlis was killed in, I'm going to say, it was in 78, and there was 2 incomplete investigations going on. The investigators had their theory. They knew who it was a stepfather. And then the patrol officers, who, by the way, investigation patrol did not hardly talk to each other, had their own investigation going on. The deputies in the area that knew, worked the area and knew the people, and none of that, or very little of that, was in a police report. And that became really the key investigation once we put it together. So bring everybody together that worked the case, and bring people also who haven't worked the case, who might, because they're not vested, could see things differently. All of those become a part of that review. Looking at lessons learned again. The answers could be lost in the file. I would find the file, and there is no file. There's a file with the county, there's a file with the BCA, there's a file with the police department, there's a file with the officer, and they're not the same. Now bring everything together and make a master file. In fact, what I found in some agencies, they only write the police reports of what supports their theory, and the real file is in Officer Jones's basement in a bunch of legal pads with the real pictures, because they're scared to put something down that doesn't support their truth. You need this, so you can't assume what's in there is correct. Information overload. Now, how do I organize it? That becomes the analyst. For most of my time, I played that dual role. As time went on, I had my own analyst. You need to be able to organize this in a way that I can look and find information. There's a huge part of this investigation of unknown people. Last name unknown, the Lanou family, we'll call them. You now can start looking at this piece and this piece and this piece. Who are they that were never interviewed? When you go out to talk to people, you bring these document with you. The name index, who is this person, and update it. You build timelines, so you can do a comparison timeline and start looking at what's true and what's not true. And then the next part is improperly eliminating suspect. I find many times somebody said, this person didn't do it, we cleared them, you dig down into it. They've never been cleared. One of the key cases we're going to talk about as we go along is a serial murder case, Joseph Turry. Joseph Turry claimed he was at work at the time of the murder. So they picked up the phone. First, they knew the answer. It wasn't him, it was a stepfather. This makes a difference. So the investigator picks up the phone, calls Ford Motor Company and says, was Joseph Turry at work at this time period? And they say yes. He's eliminated from the investigation and from the other possibilities. Now, later on in the investigation, I had a team of people follow up on it because there was no paper, as in his work. They had the wrong Joseph Turry. His father worked at Ford Motor Company, not him. So he was eliminated, and the investigation continued to the answer they knew to be, which in fact was incorrect. You've got to be thorough. You've got to be ridiculously thorough. You can't believe anything or trust anything, and it's not personal, it's not offensive. Lessons learned. All right, people talk. They do. They talk over time. They told somebody. My team of people spent more time in prisons talking to people that were cellmates of people who had been in and out of prison or friends. They told somebody something. Their stories change over time. People change. Vi Linenroop was a murder case in Stillwater, Minnesota. Now this is one of them where actually the main suspect was the one that committed the murder. In most of my cases, that's not true. We went out to Missouri to talk to an individual, and we found this person. And over time, now I want you to picture, the person I'm talking about lived a tough life. She was part of a motorcycle gang, semi kind of. She would have lied to us. She would have never told us the truth. Now she has a family. She had kind of a business. Her husband has a very good job. This is not the same person. Now, when you talk about years can be your friend, there's a lot of people at the time this happened, who they were. They were dealing with drugs. They were doing things. The law enforcement were not their friend. 5 years later, it's not the same person. 10 years later, it's definitely not. And 15, this is a complete different person. So don't assume what you have from the past is the truth. You're going to have to take a good look at and try to find the answer. So you really, I don't want to sound cynical, you don't believe anything in the file. You got to check, double check, and triple check and see how it changes. And it does change. So this isn't a little job. This is a tedious job. I want to walk you through an investigation. Again, long-term focus, team approach, bringing people together. Now I want you to picture, we have a young girl who's been murdered, Marlis Wellenhouse. Sad story. She's 18 years old. She come home from school. She dropped her friends off. She went on home. 45 minutes later, maybe a little longer, her mother shows up and finds her. Her head is completely smashed in. The mother knows she's not going to survive. She calls for help. She actually dies 2 days later. She's a donor. But anyway, where do you start? Who killed poor Marlis Wellenhouse? Now you start investigation. You start in the middle, like normal. You say, okay, who does she know? Who are friends? Who are acquaintances? And we work our way out. So let's look at the process and where the disease of certainty falls in. What we have here is two different paths. Now the best scenario in the world is I have a video, I have fingerprints, I have DNA, I have all the evidence. When I put it together, there's only one possible answer at all, and that is the stepfather, who became the main focus of the investigation. Reality is we don't know. Many cases start off this way. I have no idea who killed her. So somebody in the room, who killed Marlis Wellenhouse? And somebody says, well, how about her boyfriend? I said, okay, your job, you two, is to prove or disprove that the boyfriend did it. So they go out there, and their passion is to prove or disprove. And then somebody else says, you know, there's a stepfather involved. Okay, you prove or disprove. Or how about the mother? She found the body. How do we know she didn't kill her? You know, so you prove or disprove the mother. And then we got teams. I know that it's hard if you're one person to do this, but we have teams going out trying to find the answer. The danger is that instead of a possibility, it becomes a reality. Well, we're talking about scenario-based investigation. What happens is we all decide it's the boyfriend. And we start building a case, and we start ignoring things that disagree with us because we know the boyfriend did it. You know, there've been some fights, there've been some problems, or maybe the stepfather. In this case, the stepfather became the focus of the investigation. And in fact, if you picked up the original investigation and looked at it, and you look at, we'll call it Volume 1, and you looked at it and read it, there'd be no doubt in your mind the stepfather did it. Years later, this case is picked up and dabbled with. If you read Volume 2, you'd say, I know it's the boyfriend. And neither one actually did it. In fact, when we were asked to work this case, they were so strong, convinced people who did it, they didn't even want to meet together as a group. There becomes a danger. Where it becomes a possibility, it becomes a reality. And now, over the years, they keep saying he got away with murder, he got away with murder, he got away with murder. I'm going to say, 90 to 95% of the cases we worked, and we solved many of them, 2 to 3 a year is big for us. It was not the person everybody knew did it. It was when they asked us to come in, many of them, they just wanted us to help them prove their case. When it was all done, the person didn't do it. That person's life was totally destroyed I call it the true secondary victim. Not enough evidence to ever go to court, no way of defending themselves, and they didn't do it. Becomes that balance. What do? I want you to be proactive. I want you to make your leads, but I want you to notice that nothing's free. And you can do unbelievable damage, and they did to these people. They were beat up, they lost jobs, they literally had to move away. People said they got away with murder. On the anniversary dates, they were targeted. There's, the media knew they did it, the police knew they did it, the community, and sometimes the family knew they did it, and they were wrong. And this becomes, you have unbelievable power as a police officer, as a government agency. So let's take a look at a case, the case we're talking about. Who killed her? We're gonna focus now and switch, because there was a drifter called Joseph Turry. And Joseph Turry literally at one point wrote up a series of confessions, supposedly. Actually, it was a roommate in jail who was trying to actually get a deal for himself, wrote up a bunch of stuff, and Turry signed it, claiming he claims he never signed any confession, but they were making complaints about the food, and he signed some sheets of paper, then this guy added all this information. Could it be true? Sure, it could be. His roommate, his cellmate, has a history of all kinds of things, and he's a lot of history of manipulating and taking advantage of people. So who knows? So they looked at the confession, they looked at it at the time, they said, no, it's incorrect, it's not true, and they disregarded it. And again, also, they checked his alibi, and Turry was at work at the time of the murder and couldn't do it, so they figured he didn't commit any of these crimes. Now, it's years later, we got a task force together, we're looking at the case. Who killed her? You got a problem. You got this ridiculous confession, quote confession, because he never really said he signed it, or he signed it but never did it. It's going to bite you, so you better clear it. So I put a team together. Your job is to prove or disprove, was Turry at work at the time? One of the guys says, I got a friend who's a biggie in Ford Motor Company. They get a hold of him. They find the records in Pennsylvania. Then one day, it's a while in the case, I get a phone call. And in fact, they said, we found the records. Joseph Turry was at work at the time of the murder. Date of birth, 1911. Joseph Turry is a junior. It was his dad. That error changed the entire investigation, and now Turry is back to be a suspect. It's funny, the confession that he, quote, didn't confess has a little story in it. A little girl, she's walking home from school in a car. This is a long rural area, gravel road. This car pulls out, and she describes it as a small little tan car, and it puts it to the floor, she said, and it's threw gravel and rocks all over her, and it took off. Turry's confession talks about he's leaving the place, driving his white Mustang, and he sees his, quote, a little bitch, and he put it to the floor and threw rocks and gravel. I mean, literally, it's in there and disregarded. And now its value becomes very serious. So let's look at the cases. We're going to start with the Ewing case, who's the older, and work our way through and take a look what was there. Now, I don't think this is isolated. I can go case after case after case where the answer is there in the file and nobody can see it, and there's individual with information that now come forward because the media becomes your friend. Joseph Turry, who's now serving time for a series of murders, which we'll talk about as we go through. Now, I'm talking about him because this case has been on 48 Hours, it's been on A&E TV, it's been in magazines, it's been Focus, and it will help show some of the errors and how easy it is to make errors when you know the answer. Now, I want to be very clear. These are intelligent, experienced investigators with an entire history of doing great work. So don't think, I'm here to criticize. I'm saying how easy it is to catch this disease, and when you do, it is fatal to your investigation. This is where the Ewings lived, out in a rural area in Minnesota, very cold. This is December. A person comes to the house, literally goes down and beats up Alice Ewing, goes upstairs and kills her children, shoots Wayne is the first one. Well, in fact, Billy's and Wayne are in the same room. Shoots both of them, actually missed Billy, kills Wayne, kills Patty, kills Susie, goes back downstairs, assaults the mother, and kills her. goes back up because he heard something, and Billy's and he pokes Billy with a shotgun. Billy moves and he shoots again, but Billy, 14-year-old, curls up in a little ball, and it literally shot the shotgun round right beside his head. Billy stays for a long time curled up, and then finally runs across to the next farm in the middle of winter, and the police come over and the investigation begins. It's a huge investigation, but it doesn't get resolved. Well, it so happens at the time there's a drifter, Joseph Turry, living in his car about 4 miles or less at a rest stop is where he lives. And he's actually up there stalking a woman from the cities, which is a whole different story. And when they arrest him, Joe Turry has several items. Now, they arrest him for 2 reasons. One, because he's been bothering the waitresses in the area, and so they bring him in, and they run his car plate, and it's a report stolen, but because he's not paying his payments. So they bring him in, and he has a little Batmobile. He has a club with him, which is a piece of pipe wrapped in leather, and he has all kinds of names of women and where they work and what they do. They bring him in, they interview him, and when they interview about the Batmobile, he claims it's his grandchild. He's 27, and when they explain that to him, he gets very upset and they drop it. It's now years later, and we're actually working the Marlis Wallenhouse case, and the prosecutor said, well, this little Batmobile, why does he have it? It makes no sense. So we contact Mr. Turry, and the victim witness advocate, not Turry, we contact Billy Euling, which we flew him in for these hearings, and asked Billy, did you ever have any little toy Mattel cars or anything? And before we can even finish, Billy says, why did you find my Batmobile? See, him and Wayne were really poor. They didn't have much, but they did have all their little toy cars. And Billy said from the day of the murder, he never saw that Batmobile. And here, all this time, it was in Turry's possession. Actually, it was in evidence taken from Turry. I call it a trophy. But the problem is, when we went and interviewed the police, they had never asked Billy about the toy car. They thought it was insignificant. It now became very significant. The next thing, there's a bruise on Alice's chest where the medical examiner looked at it, and so did an investigator, and wrote up in a police report that it was the butt of a shotgun. I want you to picture what a butt of a shotgun would look like. Here's the bruise, and here is the club that was found in his possession. And now, as you notice, it's not the butt of a shotgun in the shape. The size of it is consistent to the club. It left a pattern on her that is very consistent when you look at the object that he carried in his car. Again, became significant. Why were these missed? Because they didn't fit what they knew the truth to be. And also because the medical examiner in this county was a local doctor who was not a board-certified forensic pathologist. And this is very common in rural areas. He didn't have the experience. In fact, when we talked to him years later, he said, I'm not a medical examiner. I was just the coroner that was on call. And again, we saw this theme on old cases again and again. When we presented this to our forensic pathologists, not with the state, but with the Ramsey County and Hennepin County, they were able to see things because they're professionals. And again, takes us back to lessons learned. So as we continue our story, the Euling case, I want to take you and move you to the next case in my story. And these are going to follow. This about 6 months later, we have the death of Marlis Wallenhouse. The young girl comes home from school. She drops her friend. She goes, then she goes to hold, drops the mail off, and 45 minutes, hour later, her mother comes and finds her with literally her head crushed in. Paramedics are called. Everybody. When they got to the crime scene, the police, it was filled with people. You all know what I'm talking about, the danger of evidence of contamination. Again, the medical examiner, who again was just the doctor on call at this time, looked at the injury on her head and said it was a small hatchet. So take a look in your mind right now what looks like the V shape of a hatchet that literally went through her skull. So that's significant because there was no hatchet at the scene. The murderer would have to bring the hatchet to the scene and then commit the crime. Now the case started again, same scenario, who killed Marlis? So was she a target? So we found in evidence, thank goodness, the piece of her skull they cut out that had this wound, and brought it into the forensic lab, and they examined it. And what it was is flat on both sides and curved with bridging in the middle of little fibers. This was no hatchet. There would be no bridging. This was a crowbar hammer, which was easily a weapon of opportunity from the house. Changed significantly the flow of the investigation. This was a difficult case, and this is actually the case we began with, putting together. This is the case with the person who saw him leaving. And now his confession started meaning something. And it's funny, when you know he didn't do it, how the confession was insignificant, or when you felt he did it, how much it meant, which takes us back to this same problem. As we move through, I want to take the next case. This is a case of a woman, a young girl, early 20s, disappears. Her car is found a period later, parked by the Mississippi, and everybody's, and she had depression problems, so therefore it must be suicide. And that became the answer. It was treated like a suicide, which in this case meant they didn't protect the evidence, they didn't keep the chain, people picked it up, they dabbled with it. Well, quite a few years later, I think it's maybe 5, 6 years later, a young little kid, kindergarten age, is playing along the Mississippi, and he finds a skull. Now, this is a backwater area, that literally, not the flow, but where the water comes back in, kind of not even a channel, and he finds a skull, because he lives in the area. He takes the skull home. Now, this is true. I can't make up this stuff. He takes it home, and his mother looks at it, cleans it up, and thinks it's an Indian artifact, and they put it on the mantle, and there it sits. Well, the kid then, school starts, and he takes it to show and tell. The teacher is a little, says, no, this is a human skull. They call the police go out to the scene you're looking at. They dig around, and they find the body, a skeleton, completely closed, all her clothes on, everything else, just a skeleton covered in the muck, and it's the missing girl. And it becomes the next one in this sequence looking at it. Now, the evidence is the point of it. The evidence is there. Now, here's another key thing. Turi literally stalked waitresses, and most of these women we talk about are waitresses. The issue is the evidence is there. Turi now has been convicted of the killing of Marlis Wellenhouse, killing of Alice, Susie, Wayne, and Patty Euling. He was convicted numerous rapes, but the other one, the evidence, the problem with the body, the other one I said with the skull, is insignificant. You can't really prove cause of death. But from the evidence, and there's more to it, we're pretty convinced he did it. I want to walk you through, why does this matter? I had somebody say, it's 20 years ago, why do you care? They care because the people have a right to know an answer, but it's more than that. I want to give some lessons. After I wrote this article, I got a lot of phone calls from all over the United States wanting me to look at cases and said how true it was and how they believed this person was innocent. And I want to talk about some of the dangers. Contamination. If I truly believe I know the answer, will it affect my investigation? Can it sway my investigation where I'm going and what the truth? And the answer is yes. Can it affect my interrogation? Yes, it can. And again, I teach interview and interrogation. It's one of the main things. It's called interview, the general art of persuasion. You as officers of the law have unbelievable power to channel information, which takes us to that witness as you build your case. Many times witnesses don't really know. Could your strong beliefs have an effect that would really change what the truth to be from what they believe the truth could be, because they don't really know, to your truth? Could you, in fact, because of being so convinced you know the answer, literally end up with an innocent person being convicted of a crime? Yes, I believe it true. Most of my cases weren't at that level. They were people's lives were destroyed who never even had a chance to go to court to defend themselves because everybody knew they did it. Again, I'll end this with the majority of my cases by far was not what everybody believed the truth. But more important, there's not a case where somebody's committed a murder that should be allowed that this person forever gets away with that crime just because of time. You deserve it. They deserve the right for you to follow up and look for the answer in these cases. That's your challenge. And welcome to, I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I hope it helps you. Have a good day.